Thanks. Hello, how are you? This digital currency business sounds very innocuous and harmless, and maybe very efficient and modern and all that, and we're all very fond of all that stuff these days. And you know, if you were to take it out of this moment's context, you might say, well, we could have an entirely different conversation about it, but you can't. You've got to put it in the context that we're in, because you know, if this came up 5 years ago, well, we'd be, you know, lolling around the place and all chilled out and not worried about stuff. But I'm after driving across from Sligo, you know, and beautiful evening on the way up, and Ireland looks fantastic, and it looks like it always was. You know, it's still there geographically and so on, but it's not there in the ways that matter for the survival of human beings of Ireland in Ireland. That's the most important thing I want to say. Ireland is now hostile to its own people, officially, governmentally, politically, legally, media, hostile. There is a war against the Irish people, and digital currency is part of that war. It's just another weapon. It's timing now. I mean, it's related to other factors. Universal basic income. It doesn't sound all that sinister, does it? Well, actually it isn't. Intrinsically, it's not sinister. 30 years ago, I was writing about universal basic income quite often, actually, in the context of the possibilities that it offered at that moment of allowing people to get out of the social welfare system and become creative again and begin to build their own lives on the foundations of an income that had no strings attached to it. Very basic, very low social welfare levels, but there were no questions, there was no means testing, there would be no enforcement of, you didn't have to not work, you didn't have to set yourself aside in order to qualify for this money. You could have this money and then you could become whatever you wanted on top of that, and then maybe you'd pay tax down the road on that. Very creative idea in that context. In the present context, it's a lethal idea, because it will make slaves of everybody. And that's really what this is all about. The digital currency, the universal basic income, all of these things are about the enslavement of the peoples of the world. Particularly, I suppose, the peoples of the West, because they have the most to lose, which means that others have the most to gain from them and from their losing. And that's fundamentally what it's all about. We have to contextualize what's happening in the context of the collapse of the currencies, the world currencies, which is imminent, the collapse of the economies of the world, which is imminent, which is orchestrated. I'll come back to that in a moment. But we have to place it in the context that there are people at this moment who have power to decide everything, and their most important criterion is that they lose nothing. They lose nothing. That is what this is about. It's not about some emergency of itself. It's not about some crisis of itself. It's not about trying to save the world, the people of the world, and protect their interests. It's not. It's in order to protect the people who have 90% of the world's wealth already, to ensure that they don't lose anything of it, and that if possible, they get most of the other 10% as well. That's what it's about. That's all it's about. And that's all any of this has been about. What's going on in this country and in other countries for the last 2.5 years has been about that. It's an orchestrated takedown. It is not a downturn. It is a takedown. So, I just want to talk for a few moments about the concept of conspiracy theory. It might be germane.
I love this part.
It might be germane because it's a very interesting phrase. It's a very, the way that journaliers use the word conspiracy theory, and they always do it in the same way. They don't just say it was conspiracy. They say, ha ha ha. They go, ha 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 ha, conspiracy theory, laugh out loud. Tinfoil, ha ha ha, tinfoil, ha 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 ha. Like they just made it up, right? They didn't make it up. It was made up by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. And its purpose is to stop people thinking about certain things. I want to explain how it works, because once you see how it works, you'll never be taken in by it again. 2 words, conspiracy theory. There's a third word there somewhere, the theorist, right? Let's say it's me. Conspiracy theory. Because this, in a way, is a kind of a conspiracy theory all of its own. The conspiracy theory that people made up the term conspiracy theory in order to stop people talking about conspiracy theories. That's kind of how it works. So, conspiracy theory. One of those words is very serious, very sinister. Which one is it? It's not theory, it's conspiracy. Okay, so, conspiracy, what is a conspiracy theorist? I'll tell you what a conspiracy theorist used to be. A conspiracy theorist used to be a great, great journalist. George Orwell was a brilliant conspiracy theorist, one of the greatest journalists in the history of the world. Because why? Because when I was a young journalist, we used to all meet in pubs in Donoghue's in Barry Row and the Donny and Nesbitt's. All these guys wanted to be journalists or were journalists, meeting other journalists. And all we ever talked about was each other's conspiracy theories. Such and such is laundering money for such and such. Have you got any evidence? Well, my girlfriend works in the bank and he lodges a lot of money every Monday morning and he doesn't sell that many chips, right? Okay, that's a conspiracy theory. What you do next as a journalist, you go out and you find the evidence, if it's there, and you compile a case which becomes a story, and which is no longer conspiracist, it is factual. That's the way journalism used to work. Now, what the term conspiracy theory does is it takes all of the sinister undertones, because conspiracy is a sinister thing. Those guys who are laundering money, they're quite sinister people. So conspiracy is a sinister thing. But they've actually flipped the meaning, flipped all the lethal, sinister, toxic connotations of the word conspiracy and put them on the word theory. So having the theory is now the sinister thing. It's not the conspiracy at all. Do you see? See how it's done? And there's another word which has crept into the lexicon. It's conspiracist. People involved in a conspiracy are called conspirators. A conspiracist has become more sinister, even though he's the guy who thinks those guys are up to something. So, you see, when you hear anybody dismissing, I've even noticed that people who are, as it were, defending themselves from the charge of being conspiracy theorists don't understand the phrase. They kind of run away from it. No, I am a conspiracy theorist. I know they're up to something. I know they're trying to destroy our lives. I know they're trying to steal everything we have. I know they're trying to kill us. So, yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist. That's my theory. So I want to explain a little bit about what's going on. There's lots of stuff going on at this moment that possibly you don't know about. It depends on where you get your information. I don't want to patronize people, but if you watch RTE, then you don't know anything. Sorry. If you read the Irish Crimes every day, you know less. If you read the Slimy Indo, you know even less than that. Everything you know is wrong. Everything you've been told is wrong. What's going on is a takedown of our lives, of the way we have lived, what we have presumed was our life. What we presumed would be the life of our children. What we presumed would be the country that we could give to our children for them to create a home in. All these things are being taken away. And all of these devices are part of that. Just briefly to talk about the digital currency idea. What is it? What's its purpose? Well, its purpose to make everything more efficient, yeah. Its purpose is to control each and every one of us. So that everything we do in financial terms, which is pretty much everything these days, is monitored, measured, retained, stored, and regurgitated as necessary to control us even more. Money is a technology. Money is a technology for essentially releasing energies from each person and allowing us to exchange those energies and have a token that we can hand to each other. That's all money is. The big problem that has occurred in our cultures is that money has become something else. It has ceased to be that. This is the kind of fault line we're on. That it has become a commodity of itself. Our economy now is essentially about 70% money laundering, essentially. Gambling. Playing games with money. Betting on countries' fate, opportunities, chances, destruction, etc. That's what goes on. The rest is pharmaceuticals. And then there's the beef industry, which is essentially another laundering operation. We are in a situation now where the government is hostile to us, has declared war upon us, has decided that it is going to, instead of representing the people who elected it, is going to represent the people who want to grab everything they can before the whole thing goes down. And we would be left bereft with our 240 euros a week if we're lucky, whatever they're going to call it. They might call it pixels or pixies or, I don't know, monkeypox notes or whatever. It doesn't matter. They would be pretty much worthless. And most people would be unemployed. There would be no work. Part of what the function of the lockdown was to destroy small businesses. And it has been hugely successful. On a global basis, the lockdowns took 3.5 trillion from small businesses and transferred it to the richest people on the planet. They became 4 trillion richer, while the working people of the world became 3.9 or 5 or what, something like that, trillion. I don't know where the other half trillion went, but I'm sure they know. This is what this is about. This is what that was about. This is what is coming now in the next few months. The next few months will be characterised in Ireland and elsewhere by acute shortages of the most essential things. People will struggle to keep their families alive. In Ireland, this is going to happen. Nobody believes this, but it is happening. Before our eyes, it is happening. The head of SuperValue, Pat McDonald, made this very innocuous statement on News Talk today, or yesterday, where he advised people to stock up on long life food. He's been attacked on Twitter as an idiot. Oh yeah, laugh out loud, conspiracy theories, They're the idiots. They're the idiots. He's right. It's way past time everybody was doing this. For the past 6 months, there's been innumerable fires in food factories, warehouses, food trains, fertilizer trains, all over the world, particularly in America and in Europe. It's arson. Arson. This is not accidental. This is not random. They want this to happen. They want to bring the human race to a pitch where they will agree to anything in order to be able to feed their own children. That is what this is about. In the last week, Ireland, the Irish government joined 2 other governments, the Netherlands and Canada, in seeking to enforce upon their own people an impossible demand with regard to nitrogen and other agricultural fertilizer compounds. Nitrogen is irrelevant to the state of the climate. If Ireland was to actually eradicate its nitrogen and its agricultural emissions completely, it would make the difference to global, whatever they call it, emissions, of about the equivalent of a thimble full of water in Lough Erne. That's what it would mean. This is all a trick. It's all a trick. The Minister for the Environment said the other day, more or less, that people can choose between farms and cars. In other words, they can choose between driving and eating. That's the deal. You can choose between driving and eating. We had a civilized country. We were told, a modern country. And these people are returning it to the Dark Ages. Because that's how they get richer in the short term. And in the long term, when they have broken the spirits of the human race, they will then rebuild the world as they please. They have a name for it. Build back better. And you know what you'll be doing? You'll own nothing. You'll have no privacy. But you'll be happy. Where's the problem? Next year, the government has already announced it's having a referendum on what's called the right to housing. What does it mean? Well, it means that basically anybody can come from any place in the world and get a house in Ireland, but the Irish people will have to surrender any spare houses or rooms that they already have. And if they vote for this, turkeys voting for Christmas will be, a very old-fashioned and weak and feeble idea. That's what they're trying to do. There's another referendum coming too, which is about water, and this is a long story, but you know the story going back a few years about the water charge and so on. And on its face, this looks to be a positive thing, because it's about the state ownership of water. But at the moment, the people own the water. I own the water, you own water. I've got a water butt outside my house down in Sligo. I collect the water from the roof. And I have a filter that can clean that and make it perfect, much better than the stuff that comes out of the tap. But if ownership of water goes into state control, I will come back to my house one evening and there will be a guard walking out my gate with my water butt under his arm. And he will inform me that it is now illegal to collect water from the roof of my house because it belongs to the state. All this stuff you won't hear about in RT, but this is what's going on. This is the conspiracies that we need to start developing theories about. We need to perfect our theories about all these conspiracies because they are real. They're happening. And they're happening in plain sight. They're telling us what they're doing. They're describing what they're doing to us, and then they do it. The digital money system, to go back to that again, the way it will work is this. You will get your basic income, universal basic income, into your account, and you will have some form of electronic identification, biometric ID, more than likely in your wrist or somewhere like that. It will be implanted. It won't be on your phone anymore. According to Elon Musk, that's very old-fashioned. So now that sounds, okay. If you think 250 quid a week is good money, then yeah, that's great. The problem is it's not really money. It's kind of tokens. It's no longer money as you understand it. Money as you understand it, cash in your pocket. When you have it, it's yours. It's yours. You can choose what to do with it. You can spend it as you please. Digital money is not that. It's not money. It's, as I say, it's like food stamps. So the way it would work is something like, I think the present, what they call the ESG system, which has been in place now for corporations and for governments. Very interesting system because it's part of this whole social credit thing, but on a more corporate and political scale. The ESG, environment, social, governmental. The country, Sri Lanka used to have the highest ESG rate in the world before it tore down the buildings of government and drove the president out of the country. We are one of the lowest, thank God. Because any country that has a high ESG rate is on the brink of disaster. And ESG is essentially what social credit will be about as well. Your performance in relation to environmentalism, ideologically speaking. Social, that means how you behave, whether do you pay your taxes on time? Do you put your feet on the seats in trains? Do you, and so on. Good. Keep doing it while you can, while it's free. And then governmental. But the problem is this: see, one day you're going along and you might have certain opinions, about the government. You don't like the government, and we used to be able to not like the government in the olden days, and that was no problem. People said, "Oh, you don't like the government." Well, I don't like them either, or I do, but I'm an idiot. So what happens is you go and you say, "Okay, well, shall I go on my holidays to Spain?" So you toddle up to the airport and you go to the check-in and you just go, and suddenly all the lights start flashing. And you're called aside and say, "Mr. Waters, seems to be a problem this morning. You don't appear to have enough credit scores to leave the country at the moment. So you'd have to go away home, work out what kind of opinions about the government might cost you all those points, and amend them rapidly if you ever want to leave your country again." That's how it works. It's the way it works in China. They've been trying it out in China for several years. It's pretty much perfected.
Or your apartment.
Or your car, your driverless car. This great new modern development that you have. Oh, great, the car drives you. You don't drive the car. Okay, wonderful. So you sit in, and it's a talking car. So the car says, "Where do you think you're going?" Well, I was thinking of going to Kinnegad. and the car says, "Who goes to Kinnegad?" But you're not going today anyway, because I've decided we're going to, we go to Crumpton instead. So this is funny, but it's not funny, because this is what they're doing. This is what's going to happen. Now, I understand that this is absolutely incredible. Nobody thinks it's as incredible as I think it's incredible. I'm absolutely stunned, gobsmacked. I worked for 40 years in the Irish media. I wrote about events as they happened. I wrote about politics and politicians. Criticised some of them, sometimes praised them on other occasions. I tried to be fair to them all the time. This isn't that country anymore. That country's gone. They've taken it. They've buried it. And it will never come back it'll probably never come back in the form that we remember it. But it'll never come back in anything like that form unless we take it back.
Could you see that change happening? Could you start there? Could you tell them when you noticed the change happening?
Oh, well, I only noticed it in retrospect. I mean, my book that I give us back the bad roads, which is a book about both my life and about Ireland's life in my life. And it harks back to a book I wrote 30 years ago called Dragon at the Crossroads, which is about my father. And it's about his life and how we saw the world and so on. And how the world came to us and what a wonderful, beautiful place Ireland was. Really, it was heartbreaking. You on RTE you hear nothing but what a terrible place Ireland is. Ireland was a heartbreakingly beautiful place.
Still is.
It still is, but these creeps are determined to destroy your enjoyment of it. and your enjoyment of just about everything else, unless you take your country from their grasp and put them in jail.
Yes.
To answer Fiona's question, just before I'll answer the question. I've had an insight in recent times about this, because when I wrote my book in 2016-17, between all those referendums, which are part of the thing I'm talking about, because there were essentially three hammer blows to the Irish Constitution. In 2012, the so-called children referendum, which basically parents surrendered their rights to the state. The marriage referendum, which basically redefined marriage, parenting and family, and then the right to life, which is a whole other story, which essentially allowed for the possibility that any time in the future the Irish people may be permitted to vote on the rights of any sector of itself. In other words, they can decide to withdraw rights from certain elements of society, if they so choose. That's not allowed, wasn't allowed in the Constitution. There's now a precedent for it. But when I was writing all this stuff, I was trying to figure out how, because that was accompanied by what you can only see, the language that comes into your mind is like words like derangement and insanity and craziness. But those words always strike you as feeble, inadequate. You know, you have to add a four-letter word along with them to give them any kind of oomph that even approaches what you're trying to say. But there's some moment I'm missing. There's some moment in recent history that I haven't noticed. And I call it, I think, the jolt of nothing happening. It's like that moment when you're sitting on a train, you know, and at a platform, and there's another train alongside. So you're kind of idly looking out the window, and you see all the people getting in and putting up their bags and settling down, and you're sort of dreamily watching. You know, suddenly there's a movement. And you say, oh, we're off, and off, you start moving, you watch the thing, the carriage is, you're speeding up, and then the train clears your line of vision, and nothing's moving, you're not moving. I call that the jolt of nothing happening. It's like an impact that makes no noise, and creates no feeling, no sensation. Something like that, I think, happened. And I also call it that there was a moment of rupture with the past, that we broke away from the past. I identified it as being sometime before 2014, but perhaps not as early as 2005-06, the end of the Celtic Tiger. So it was sometime between the end of the Celtic Tiger, say, and 2014, when that whole marriage referendum stuff cranked up. And that was the most sinister element, because that's when the goons went to the streets to scare people into silence and tell you what you were permitted to say and what you were permitted to think and what you were not permitted to say or think. That was what that was all about. Fundamentally, that was what it was about. And that's still with us. You know?
Yes, I think if you could wrap up.
Yeah, I will, yeah. Thanks. So, it occurred to me only in the last 2 weeks when the moment was. The moment was a year. It was 2011. You may have heard of the phrase colour revolution. Colour revolution, the first one started actually, funnily enough, in Ukraine in 2005. It's when outside interests go into a country and essentially capture its political system, capture its culture, and capture its people's hearts and minds. That happened in Ireland in 2011. There were a number of incidents. I'll just go through them very quickly. In January, there was an election in February. In January, a very interesting thing happened. Before that, there had been talk about other parties coming into the system who would be non-political, who would fight for the people and their rights against the conglomerates, against the banks, against the EU, against all these supranational forces. A party was mooted. Its name was Democracy Now! It was actually involved several leading journalists, journalists. Fintan O'Toole, Eamon Dunphy, David McWilliams were the kingpins. And that party was basically saying, oh no, we're going to do it. We're going to step up, and we're going to take on the system, and we're going to represent the people of Ireland. So everybody says, great, we'll vote for them. I didn't even vote for them, notwithstanding the personnel. In January, Mr. O'Toole announced that he would have to postpone the revolution because he couldn't find a babysitter. Democracy now was shelved. The grave was left clear for Enda Kenny to step in and seize the moment. That's how it happened. That was not a coincidence. The second thing then was the election of Enda Kenny. The third thing, two things together, in May of that year, two visits in the 1 week. The Queen of England and the President of the United States. The first one, basically a mass formation in 7 days, where we were bombarded with propaganda about how we had to move on from the past and let go of our own sense of all this nonsense about sovereignty and all that, and move into the modern world and blah, blah, blah. And then, the final episode that I draw your attention to was the presidential election in November of that year. When, if you remember, a week before polling day, a man called Sean Gallagher was leading the field by a country mile. He was a non-politician. He had a slight involvement with Fianna Fáil, but he was like a fresh-faced guy, a businessman, Dragon's Den. He was very different. He was very articulate, very likeable. He had 42% of the vote a week before polling day, according to the polls. On the following Monday, he was ambushed on the front line by Pat Kenny and Martin McGuinness, and he came in with 30%. Michael D. Higgins, who had been also ran a week earlier, stepped up and became President of Ireland. Michael D. Higgins signed apartheid into Irish law a year ago. And 6 months later, he was sympathising with people on the death of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Not alone is he a criminal and a fraud, but he's also a hypocrite.